Tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Ian Williamson. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government here at Te Haringa Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Our business school prides ourselves on being at the center of the nexus of innovation here in New Zealand. We have technology, we have government policy, we have private sector, professional services. And it is this opportunity to bring together both the economic consideration as well as policy and civic society that we think makes us unique. And for those purposes, it is a great pleasure for me to actually have with us the Honorable Grant Robertson, who's the Minister of Finance for New Zealand, to speak with us today about the 2020 budget, the budget which I believe has been named Rebuilding Together. This format will be, Minister Robertson will have about 15 minutes to talk about the budget. But what is really nice is we've asked high school students from around the country to submit questions about the budget that we will present to the minister for his response. I should say up front, thank you very much to all the high school students and all the high schools who responded. We received some very thoughtful and some very insightful questions, some tough ones as well for the minister. So I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this activity. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to the minister.
Well, kia ora, tēnā koe Ian, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Greetings to all of you, wherever you are when you see this broadcast and conversation. It's actually a real highlight for me of the year to come and be a part of this event and to have questions, particularly from high school students, about the budget. I always find that the questions I get in this particular format are some of the toughest that get asked, and so I really look forward to answering those questions in a few minutes' time. Everybody will be aware that Budget 2020 was put together in the shadow of COVID-19. And COVID-19 is not only the most significant health crisis that the planet has faced for many, many decades, it's also a 1 in 100 year economic shock. And so putting a budget together in those circumstances was enormously challenging. As most people would imagine or would know, the budget process actually starts many months before it's delivered in around May of each year. And obviously we'd done that process in 2019. We had begun to create the budget from about September or October 2019 for delivery in May 2020. When COVID-19 came along, we were very well advanced, and in fact we'd virtually completed our budget work, and we had to take a moment to stop, as I think most businesses had to do around New Zealand, and say what needs to change here. And so the budget that I ended up delivering on the 14th of May was very different from the one that we had intended to deliver. It was different in a couple of specific ways. One was the quantum of spending in it, which obviously was significantly higher than we had planned, but proportionate to a 1 in 100 year economic shock. Secondly was the whole way in which we had to deliver it, and it's worth noting that putting together a budget under a level 4 lockdown was very challenging for the officials at the Treasury, who did a remarkable job. But it also meant that some of the things that normally happen with the preparation of a budget had to be put to one side. So for example, the government usually agrees its budget package about 6 weeks before delivery, and what happens between that date and the date of delivery of the budget is what's called the budget moratorium, where no new spending is allowed to be approved. Clearly we had to put that to one side this year as we responded to COVID-19. So the context of that was, by the time we got to COVID-19, to our budget 2020, we had already put aside a significant amount of resources for responding to COVID-19. That began with our $12 billion package on the 17th of March, which lifted main benefits, doubled the winter energy payment, and put in place the first incarnation of the now very well-known wage subsidy scheme that has paid out about $11 billion to support 1.6 million New Zealanders to stay and work through the COVID-19 lockdown period. So we went into the budget with that, and then additional support across everything from keeping our aviation sector going, through to additional supports for low-income New Zealanders, to changes to our tax system to support our business community, all of which led to around about another $13 billion or so already being spent before we even got to budget day. So it was a very unusual situation. The plan that we laid out on budget day has three parts to it. respond, recover and rebuild. And those three phases are not distinct phases, they overlap one another, but they do give you a guide to the plan that we have as a government to be able to get on top of COVID-19 and then come out the other side even stronger. The response phase of our plan you've seen, that involved bolstering our health system up so that we were ready for COVID-19, and significant resources go into the budget again in addition to what we've already put in place there, and the cushioning of that economic blow, and the wage subsidy scheme was the core of that. At its heart, the wage subsidy scheme is about making sure that people stay connected to their employment. Because one of the lessons we've learned from previous economic crises and recessions is that the scarring effect of unemployment is significant. So we wanted to do everything we can to give breathing space to companies and employees, not to make precipitous decisions based out of fear of what might happen, but give 12 weeks to be able to be more sure of what the environment would be. And as it happens, that 12 weeks ends today, the day that we're filming this. We have agreed, and we did agree in the budget, to an extension to the wage subsidy scheme, but with much more targeted and tighter criteria. And this is very much for businesses, for example, in the hospitality, tourism or retail sectors who weren't able to trade at all under level 4 or level 3, and in many cases have very limited ability to generate revenue even under level 2 or now as we go into level 1. So we have an 8-week extension as part of our response phase. But the main focus of the budget is on the recovery and rebuilding phases for New Zealand. And critically, that's about jobs. It's about the retention of people in employment, but also the creation of new jobs, and a number of sectors where we think we can do that job as well as start to look towards what a rebuild would look like. So, for example, in the construction sector, we know that we want more houses to be built in New Zealand. We know that that sector is a job-rich sector. We also know that the lack of housing has been a real drain on our productivity and our society in the long term. So, in the budget, we've put aside funding to support the building of 8,000 new public housing places. In addition, a critical part of our package has been a $1.6 billion package for training and skills development. Now, this is going to mean that apprenticeships across the board are now free. That means we're going to get more people into some key sectors like construction and others where we know we're going to need a workforce coming out the other end of this. And this is a lesson learned from the global financial crisis. At that time, one of the first things that happened was that people laid off apprentices. And that meant that when the recovery came along, we didn't have the skilled workforce that we needed. We're not prepared to let that happen again, and that's why we're also going to be supporting businesses to keep their apprentices on during this period where there may be some slowdown for them. That whole package of training and education is absolutely vital, and it's the biggest investment in that area we've ever seen. At the same time, there's opportunities for job creation in things like our environment and conservation sectors. We put $1 billion package aside to deal with issues like pest management, the fencing of waterways to stop pollution and runoff into our rivers and lakes and streams, the development of our dock estate in terms of the huts and tracks. That's job creation in the immediate term to support people who may have found themselves out of work as a result of COVID-19. And then we've got sector-specific packages. For example, for tourism, we know that this is a sector that's been hugely affected. Closing our borders was one of the main things that has allowed us to get on top of COVID-19, but it has a massive spillover effect into the economy. And so that $400 million initial package to support our tourism sector, to reorientate businesses, to be able in some cases to put businesses into hibernation, is a really important part of dealing with that. And we have those same sector packages looking at areas like horticulture and agriculture, supporting specific communities such as our Māori and Pacifica communities who have been and will be more affected by the economic impact, and in areas that you might not think of as economic but actually are significant job generators, the arts and in sports, where those are really important for the way our communities come together, but they also do generate a lot of jobs. Alongside that, the budget has a significant part of the recovery package aimed towards our social infrastructure. We have seen a lot of communities really affected by this, and so there is funding for programs like food in schools, significant support to NGOs who provide family violence services and other services in our community, building on what we've done already in terms of the income support part of our package. And all of that leads to the third phase of our plan, which is the reset and the rebuild. And this is an opportunity which doesn't come along very often in life, to be able to stop and say, is what we're doing working, and what were issues that we had not got on top of properly. Our economic plan is focused around improving productivity, improving sustainability and improving inclusion in our economy, and each of those gets a boost through this budget as well. This is a once-in-a-generation budget. The amounts of money involved are extraordinary, but if you save for a rainy day, you need to put the umbrella up when it's required, and that's what we've done here. So New Zealand entered into this crisis in a very strong fiscal position. Our level of debt compared to the rest of the world was extremely low. We came in at just under 20% of GDP, whereas if you compare to a country like the United Kingdom, they had 80%, or the US 90%. So yes, it does mean we are going to be seeing an extended period of deficits and of increased debt. But New Zealand can afford to do this. It's also very cheap for New Zealand to be able to borrow at the moment. Our cost of borrowing on that extra money is actually very much equivalent to previous costs as a percentage of GDP, even though we're borrowing a lot more because interest rates are very low at the moment. So at the end of this, we will have higher levels of debt, but they will still be among the lowest in the OECD. And that means that as our economy grows, we will be able to reduce that debt. But the philosophy that I took into this was, I would rather protect the generations of today, the young people of today, from growing up in a house where perhaps their parents don't have jobs or they don't have sufficient income. I'd rather protect those young people from the scarring effect of that, and then all work together to reduce that debt in the future, rather than try and come up with some magic percentage number for debt right now, when we know that New Zealand can afford to do this and protect our people at the same time. Final thing I'd like to say is that Budget 2020 is different in another way, and that's that it's not the end of the road. We have put aside a $50 billion fund for our response and recovery, and $20 billion or so of that remains unspent. That's important because the full story of COVID-19 has not yet been told. The economic impacts across the globe are enormous. And while here in New Zealand we can be very satisfied and proud with the work of the team of 5 million in getting on top of the virus, infections grow daily around the world. This virus will be with our planet for several years to come and will have a strong economic impact on New Zealand. But we're well placed to get through that. We're well placed as a country to be able to take the spirit of coming together, he waka eka noa. We are all in this together. Take that spirit from our health response and add it into our economic recovery as well. My final word is this. One of the lessons we've learned is the importance of supporting our own communities through this. So if you do get the opportunity to buy New Zealand made, to experience New Zealand, to get out and support New Zealand businesses, artists, sporting events, please do so, because that's the one thing we can all do right now to make sure our recovery and rebuild goes well. So I look forward to answering your questions, and I look forward to working with all of you as part of our team of 5 million on our recovery and rebuild.
Thank you very much, Minister, for providing us with an excellent overview of the 2020 budget. So I have some questions that we've received from high school students across the country, and I'll kind of break them into a few themes. You mentioned in your overview this issue of debt, and that was certainly one of the questions that we received quite a few responses about. So Luke from Roxbury Area High School asked, what impact do you think the budget will have on government debt repayments in 10 years when he's 26? And similarly, St. Mary's College had a question that says, how do you propose to address the burden, or perhaps even unfair burden, on young people of the requirements to eventually pay back the massive debt that has been incurred?
Yeah, and look, that was a common question from everyone. I want to give a shout out to my old school, King's High School, where I know that I think it was Sam from King's also asked the same question as well. So I can understand why this is a really important and big question for people, because these kinds of levels of debt we have not seen in New Zealand for many years. The last time our level of net core crown debt reached this was in the early 1990s. The good news for New Zealand is our economy is much stronger now than it was then, and secondly, the cost of borrowing is actually much lower than it was back in the 90s. So in a sense, for the government, the immediate issue when it comes to debt is interest rates, can we afford to do this? We have historically low interest rates and a projection from most economists that they will stay low for a long period of time. So the reassurance I can give people is that the borrowing is affordable and the economy is strong coming into this. In terms of how we go with repaying debt, when you look at the budget documents, in the forecast period, yes, the 4-year forecast period, debt peaks up at around 53% of GDP. It then starts to come down as the economy grows, and it's really important that we get a focus on saying if we can get the economy back humming and growing again, then that level of debt will come down. Obviously, we also have to be very careful with our spending from here on out. And a large bulk of the spending that we're doing is actually temporary because it's there and it's designed to get people through this. But obviously, the careful fiscal management that my government's shown and previous governments have shown will have to continue in order to make sure that that debt burden reduces over time. But as I said in my introductory comments, I look at it that the future generations are actually the ones who need support now as well. And if we regard ourselves as all being in this together to resolve this, I think that's better. I think it's a real mistake to set generations against one another in this. And I did notice in some of the questions that came through this question of, well, what should we do about the superannuation age? I just think that's not the answer for us at this time. I mean, governments over time may well need to address that, but right now we need to be supporting people who are coming into retirement because perhaps many of them may not have been able to work in their last 2 or 3 years of their working life because we've got unemployment rising. So I'm not a fan of the intergenerational thing. Maybe it's because I'm Generation X and I sit right in the middle, but I think but I think it's really important that that debt repayment is done over a period of time. But I will say New Zealand will have higher levels of debt for a period of time than we've been used to, but that's because we haven't faced a 1 in 100 year shock before.
So one of the other issues that came up in the questions was taxes. One of the other aspects in terms of how we might repay the debt. And Wellington East Girls College provided a question. And assuming that you're still in government, when they enter the job market in 4 to 8 years' time, how heavily can they expect to be taxed? Or is there some assurance that a contractually fiscal policy involving tax increases will not be used? And there may be more creative ways for the government to raise funds.
Yeah, look, I mean, these are questions that future governments are going to have to resolve. And I guess the thing I can assure the question is that I remain committed to a fair tax system. New Zealand does have a progressive tax system, and it is important that people pay their taxes in proportion to their income and in proportion to what they can afford. We also need to look at the overall balance of our tax system. So income taxes are only one part of a taxation system, and we had the tax working group look at that, and they've provided us with some interesting frameworks around things like environmental taxes, for example, to be able to support us as we go forward from here. So there will be a mixture of policy responses that come out the other side of this, but New Zealand has a tax system which has some real advantages as well as some gaps. And the real advantages are around the fact that it's easy and simple and clear to understand. And I think that's one of the things that remains important to me in terms of the principles. It's also, generally speaking, we set our taxes at a lower rate than many other countries around the world. And while it's important that they remain proportionate to our need, those principles are important. Some of the disadvantages are that we don't capture all of the ways in which people make money within our tax system, and so those are issues that will need to be dealt with. But for those people, rest assured those core principles of the tax system remain important.
So another big question we received from the students was around unemployment, as you can appreciate. And Ella from Otago Girls High School sent in a question, says, how does the current budget support young people to have good employment opportunities in the future?
Yeah, and look, this is going to be probably the number one issue in the economy for the next year or two, at least. The forecast in the budget saw unemployment peaking just under 10%. The good news is that even since the budget, most economists have brought that down a little bit. NZIER, New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, said maybe around 8%. Some of the banks are similarly looking at that because we have rebounded a bit more quickly than was forecast. But even at 8%, that's a doubling of the unemployment rate from what we've seen. So that's why there's such a big focus in the budget around apprenticeships, trade training, making sure we give open access to the areas where we know there are job opportunities in the future. It's why we're putting a lot of money and support behind small businesses. I'm a believer that as we come out of this and people are looking for job opportunities, we should take the philosophy of growing our prosperity and our wealth from the ground up. And that really does mean a focus on, for example, supporting small businesses to do e-commerce, to have a digital offering. So that's an opportunity there potentially for young people as they come through this. Obviously, we've got existing programs like Fees Free and the additional student allowance support and so on that we gave to support people to train and retrain. And then, as I say, there are the sector-specific programs where we're working through with anything from tourism to agriculture and horticulture around how we can see good high-wage jobs being created in those sectors. So all of those things come together. One thing I didn't have a chance to talk about, there's so much in the budget, was around a concept we've got called industry transformation plans. And this is actually looking at areas where we think there's real potential for New Zealand to take a lead and to be able to create new jobs. So a couple of those that people might be interested in are agri-tech, agricultural technology. So how we apply new technology to what we're already good at in terms of the production of agriculture, digital services, which is clearly an area that a lot of people are interested in getting themselves involved in today. And so we're going to be developing those plans over the next few years so that, you know, we've got a focus for young people to say, well, actually, that's a career that I could go into. So a big focus on that in the budget because we know the government's got to be an active player in helping support the creation of jobs.
One of the other big themes that we saw across the high school students' questions was a real appreciation of the importance of sustainability in the environment. And there were many questions that sort of touched on this issue around how does the government plan to balance the economic needs with continued investment in sustainability?
Yeah, and look, for me, we should never allow ourselves to buy into a false dichotomy here that somehow the economy and the environment are separated out. They're not. They're two sides of the same coin. And we've had that philosophy throughout our time in government. And what COVID-19 has done has been this huge disruption, but it doesn't change the really important goals we have as a government, one of which is the transition to a low carbon economy, because for New Zealand, that actually is the only way forward for sustainability and prosperity at the same time. So the budget continues us down that path. And if we look at some of the areas we've been working on, renewable energy, where New Zealand does really well with 90% of our electricity from renewables, but we want to push on from that. But then what are the opportunities that come off that? And one area, again, where there's further support in the budget and in the programs we've already got underway is the development of a hydrogen economy. So because New Zealand produces so much of its electricity renewably, we can then be the home of green hydrogen. Now, we've already got partnerships going with companies out of Japan around the production of hydrogen to fuel our transport fleet and other energy needs. That's the kind of thing we've got to push on, where there is both an opportunity for prosperity, but it supports our sustainability. Other areas too, our transport fleet, industrial heat, the way in which our big manufacturers provide energy, we're working on that as well. So we must not allow the disruption of COVID-19 to somehow be used as an excuse to back off those sustainability initiatives, and we certainly aren't going to do that.
So the class of 2020, the graduating class of 2020, is going to be entering into an environment that, well, we haven't seen, if not ever, certainly in quite a long time. And I'm certain that they're excited because they're getting out of high school, but they're also quite nervous because they're entering into an environment where their parents probably don't have good advice for them. Their parents never had to deal with this. I'd be curious, maybe if you had some last words around what you would tell those students who are about to leave that, they're about to have this great success and enter into this wild world. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, look, it is unprecedented, and the government, just as much as individuals, is facing unknown territory. I think what we're trying to do is go back to some really core principles here, which is, we are all in this together, and that as a government we know that we've got a role to support people when times are tough, but also provide opportunities for people. And so I guess my piece of advice would be to stay optimistic. New Zealand had a robust economy going into this. We were doing well. Unemployment was low. Wages were going up. we will come out of this well too. It's just going to take a bit of time and a bit of effort from all of us to work together and do that. So yeah, that would be my main piece of advice. Retain your optimism. You might have to delay your overseas experience if you're we're thinking of doing a gap year or something like that between.
You could just pick a different island.
Yeah, exactly. So do your gap year in the South Island. But yeah, there are going to be some changes that people are going to face. But I think this has been a really tough time, and it isn't over. There is, particularly the rest of the world is really still struggling with new infections, and that means our border restrictions will stay in place, hopefully with the exception of a couple of bubbles with our Australian and Pacific neighbours. But so things are going to be different, and change is always hard to deal with, but stay optimistic and stay entrepreneurial as well. I do really believe the opportunity to grow prosperity from the ground up for people to be their own bosses in the future remains an important part of what we do. So yeah, we're here to help, we're here to support, and I think if we all take on that spirit of uniting as a country for recovery, we'll do well.
Minister, personally, I'd just like to thank you and your team for all the hard work you've done for our country over the last several months. It certainly has been unprecedented, but I think we can all be quite proud of how New Zealand has pulled through, and certainly that doesn't happen without excellent leadership, so thank you very much. And on behalf of the Wellington School of Business and Government, thank you very much for taking the time to come join us today. I do hope that the various audiences around the country that had an opportunity to view this gain some great insight from how we've, as a country, have attempted to deal with this unprecedented event. And I'm certain that many around the world, for many generations, will be studying New Zealand's response because of some of the many innovations that we've implemented. Thank you very much for the day, and thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks, Ian.